It all began with a simple little sign. Nothing fancy, just a no soliciting sign I bought online, the kind you see in every neighborhood, but I decided to put my own spin on it. I wrote in bold letters, "No soliciting, no drama, no HOA tyranny." I thought it was funny, lighthearted, a little joke for anyone brave enough to walk past my yard. Little did I know, it would set off a chain reaction that made my quiet little street feel like the front line of a war zone. I remember putting it in the ground early on a Saturday morning. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, birds chirping, everything peaceful, and then I noticed movement across the street. Karen, of course it had to be Karen. She's the kind of HOA board member who treats her pink track suit like a uniform of authority. I swear she spends half her day driving around the neighborhood in her electric golf cart, clipboard in hand, eyes like a hawk scanning for violations. She stopped, squinted at my sign, and I swear she muttered something about me challenging the HOA. I waved innocently. She didn't wave back. Instead, she stomped off, muttering into her Bluetooth device, presumably rallying the HOA troops. And that's when I had my first little warning bell in my head. This isn't going to stay funny for long. But I thought, what's the worst that could happen? It's just a sign. My neighbors would chuckle. Maybe someone would compliment me. But that afternoon, the first text came from one of the HOA board members. "Your sign violates Section 14B of our community guidelines. Remove it immediately." I laughed. Section 14B? I'd read the HOA rules before buying my house, and I'm pretty sure there was nothing about sarcastic signage. So I replied casually something like, "Thanks for the heads up. I'll review the rules again and let you know if I need a lawyer." I should have known that response would do exactly what I didn't want, escalate everything. Because within the next hour I saw them, not just Karen, but two men I didn't recognize, packing slowly in front of my house, staring at the sign like it was a nuclear device ready to go off. I peeked from the blinds, and I swear one of them had a badge clipped to his belt, but it didn't look like a police badge. It looked like one of those novelty badges you buy online for Halloween. They didn't leave. Instead, they started taking photos. Not normal photos either, intimidating up close as if they were documenting evidence for a criminal trial. My heart rate picked up. Something about the way they moved together, it was almost like a rehearsed intimidation tactic. But I told myself, calm down, it's probably just overzealous HOA members. Then came the knock on the door. A solid, loud knock that made the dog start barking and my coffee spill across the counter. I opened it cautiously, expecting perhaps one of my neighbors, but it was them. The two men, badges slightly askew, standing there like they owned the place. "We need you to remove that sign immediately," one of them said, voice low, almost menacing. "It's against HOA regulations, and you could face fines, legal action, or further enforcement." I blinked. Further enforcement? I asked, trying not to laugh. Like what, a traffic ticket from the HOA, or do you mean handcuffs? They didn't smile. One of them scribbled something in a little notebook, like I had just committed the crime of the century. I felt my pulse quicken, not out of fear, but because something about the whole scenario was bizarrely surreal. I decided to stay calm. I smiled politely. "I'll take it under advisement," I said, "but maybe you should double-check your Section 14B before you escalate anything. I'd hate for this to get messy." They glared, mumbling about reporting to the authorities, and walked off, taking their photos and notes with them. My hands were still trembling, partly from adrenaline, partly from disbelief. I closed the door, leaned against it, and thought, well, this is officially not a normal Saturday anymore. That night I sat on my porch, staring at my little sign glowing in the lamplight, feeling equal parts amusement and unease. Something told me this wasn't over. I didn't know it yet, but the HOA was about to find out that I'm not just a homeowner, and what they thought was a harmless violation was about to blow up in ways they could never imagine. And somewhere in the shadows, Karen was probably plotting her next move. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle outside made me tense up. My mind kept replaying the encounter with the two HOA cops, the way they wrote notes as if I'd committed some grave crime. I kept staring at my sign, half expecting it to start glowing or explode, because that's how ridiculous the situation felt. By mid-morning, I had my coffee in hand, trying to convince myself it was just overzealous neighbors. But then it happened, the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps approaching my front door. My stomach dropped. I peeked through the blinds. There they were, two men, badges glinting in the sunlight, hats pulled low, walking with that we mean business swagger that only looked half real. One had a leather vest over a polo shirt, the other wore mirrored sunglasses that made him look like a generic action movie villain. They carried clipboards, a camera, and oddly, a measuring tape. They knocked hard. I opened the door, heart pounding, trying to act calm. "Good morning," I said, keeping my tone light. "Can I help you?" The taller one stepped forward, flashing his badge, or what looked like a badge, and said, "We're here on behalf of the HOA. that sign violates community rules. You must remove it immediately." I blinked on behalf of the HOA with badges. I tried to keep my tone neutral, but inside my brain was screaming, "These are not real cops, these are cosplay HOA enforcers." "Yes," he said as if that explained everything. "We are authorized to enforce compliance. If you refuse, fines will escalate and further action may be taken." I suppressed a laugh, although a snort almost escaped. "Further action like what? Sending a strongly worded letter?" I raised an eyebrow. "Or maybe calling the real authorities." His partner scribbled something frantically on a notepad. I noticed their hands trembled slightly, maybe from excitement, maybe from nerves. It was hard to tell. I kept my voice calm, but the humor in the situation was impossible to ignore. They looked like kids playing dress-up with way too much confidence. "We have reports that residents are disturbed by the sign," the taller one said, voice low, almost menacing. "You are creating unrest in the community." I forced myself to nod slowly, like I was considering this serious accusation. "Creating unrest? I see. Well, I wouldn't want to disturb anyone, but I'd need proof that the HOA has the authority to enforce this." He faltered for a moment, clearly not expecting a homeowner to challenge them like this. His partner leaned in and whispered, probably hoping I wouldn't notice. That's when I realized how absurd the whole scene was. I wanted to laugh, but something told me to play it cool. "Let's see your documentation," I said casually, stepping aside. "Do you have a legal warrant, any official paperwork?" The taller one froze. His hand hovered over the clipboard like he wasn't sure if he should hand it over or pretend it didn't exist. I stared at him, calm, deliberate, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. Finally, he stammered, we have HOA authorization, it's Authorization from a homeowners association," I interrupted, smiling faintly, "does not make you law enforcement. Interesting that you brought badges, though." I let the words sink in. There was an awkward pause. I could feel my pulse racing, not out of fear, but because I knew the tide was about to turn. I didn't yet reveal who I really was, but just the calm certainty in my voice made them hesitate. Something in their posture changed. The swagger faltered, the "we mean business" act cracked. I continued, deliberately casual. "Look, I'm happy to talk this out, but I'm not removing the sign today. If there's an issue, maybe the HOA can send someone official." My tone implied I knew exactly what that would mean. They exchanged a quick glance, muttered under their breath, and finally said, "We'll be back, and if you haven't complied, there will be consequences." And with that, they turned and left, slowly, deliberately, trying to look like they were in control, but failing miserably. I watched from the porch as they disappeared down the street, measuring tape in hand like props from some low-budget drama. Once the coast was clear, I exhaled deeply, trying to steady my nerves. I knew this wasn't over. The tension in the air felt electric, like a storm was building. I sat back on my porch, coffee cup in hand, staring at my sign. A small, uneasy thought crept into my mind. These people actually believe they have authority, and if they return, I have to be ready. But for now, all I could do was watch, wait, and savor the absurdity of the moment. Because deep down, I had a secret that none of them could possibly know, and that secret was about to change everything. The morning after their visit, I thought I might get a moment of peace. I was wrong. By 9 a.m., there were notes plastered all over my property, one on the mailbox, one stuck in the front door handle, and another slid under my welcome mat. Each one was more absurd than the last. "Immediate removal of the sign required," one read. "Failure to comply will result in fines and legal action." Another said, "Your conduct is causing unrest in the community. Cease immediately." I stared at them for a long moment, coffee in hand, a grin creeping across my face. My neighbors walked by, giving me curious looks, and I imagined their internal monologues. Is this really happening? But as funny as it was, a thread of unease had begun to weave through me. These weren't just passive-aggressive notes. Whoever was doing this was organized, coordinated, and most importantly, intimidating themselves. Then my phone rang, caller ID blocked. I answered cautiously. "Good morning," a deep, serious voice said. "We're here to make sure you comply with HOA regulations. That sign must come down. This is your final warning." I froze for a moment, then forced a chuckle. Final warning? From whom exactly? Because last I checked, the HOA doesn't have a paramilitary branch. Silence, a pause that felt like it stretched for hours, then a muttered, we are authorized." I took a sip of my coffee, pretending to be calm. Authorized by whom? The HOA board, the PTA, maybe the local dog-walking committee? I let the sarcasm hang in the air, knowing full well that my calmness was unnerving them more than my words. After hanging up, I looked out my window. Across the street, Karen was packing, arms crossed, muttering into her Bluetooth device like some general orchestrating a battle. And that's when I noticed it. The two men from yesterday were back, standing by her driveway, talking quietly, occasionally glancing in my direction. Their clipboard had grown suspiciously thick. I could almost hear the rustling of plans, strategies, and imagined enforcement procedures. It struck me just how serious they were taking this. And that's when a tiny shiver ran down my spine. Because these people didn't just want my sign down, they wanted to assert control to prove their dominance. They didn't realize they were poking a hornet's nest they didn't understand. I leaned back, coffee in hand, pretending to sip leisurely while my mind raced. I had a choice. I could fight them head-on and risk a messy confrontation, or I could wait, watch, and let them dig their own hole. I decided on the latter. Patience had always worked better than force. As the day stretched on, the tension grew. I caught glimpses of them lurking near the end of my driveway, pretending to check something in their notepads but really watching me. Each time I looked, my pulse quickened just enough to feel alive, but not enough to panic. I started noticing more subtle moves, too. Flyers in my mailbox, neighbors giving knowing glances, Karen's pink tracksuit showing up on the horizon more often than it should. Every little detail added weight to the growing unease. And then came the night. Around 10 p.m., I was sitting on my porch trying to unwind when I saw shadows moving near my yard. At first, I thought it was just a raccoon or a stray cat, but no. Two figures were crouched low, obviously trying not to be seen. I didn't recognize them. Whoever they weren't planning to knock politely. I felt a chill, not fear exactly, but a heightened awareness that this had gone far beyond HOA memos and silly threats. These people were testing the boundaries. And I knew deep down that boundaries were about to be tested in ways they hadn't imagined. I went inside slowly, closing the blinds, and sat in the dark trying to calm myself. My mind replayed every interaction from the past 2 days, the notes, the phone call, the lurking figures. The absurdity of it all collided with a very real tension. These were not normal neighbors anymore. Something bigger was brewing, and the next move could tip the scale. As I sat there sipping water, I couldn't help but think, they have no idea who they're dealing with. And somewhere in the quiet of my neighborhood, the HOA was plotting their next step, completely unaware that their next visit would change everything. By the 4th day, it was clear the HOA wasn't giving up. The fake cops had become a daily presence. I'd see them parked across the street, clipboards in hand, taking photos of my yard, measuring distances with that ridiculous tape measure like some kind of suburban SWAT team. Each time, my heart would skip a beat, but only for a moment because I knew I had an ace up my sleeve. I decided it was time to play along. If I acted like I was intimidated, they'd overreach. If I stayed calm and collected, I could let their own paranoia unravel them. I made a point of appearing flustered when I answered their knocks, sighing heavily, muttering things like, "I don't know if I can handle another warning today," all while secretly savoring the absurdity of it. That afternoon, one of them showed up at the gate, clipboard in hand. He squared his shoulders, trying to look official. "Good afternoon, sir," he said, tone firm. "We need you to remove the sign. This is your final warning." I chewed my lip, looking genuinely anxious. "Final warning?" I said softly, glancing down at my coffee cup. Oh, I didn't realize it had escalated to that level. Maybe I should call someone. He didn't know what to say. His face twitched. His pencil hovered over the clipboard like he was afraid I'd snatch it away. I let the silence stretch, sipping my coffee slowly, watching him squirm. "You, were authorized to," he began, but then faltered. "Authorized," I echoed, voice trembling as if I were on the verge of a breakdown. "Authorized by whom? The HOA? Did they vote on this?" I looked around helplessly as if I needed reassurance. I'm just a simple homeowner, I don't want trouble." His partner, standing awkwardly behind him, tried to interject but couldn't find the words. They were visibly frustrated, trying to maintain authority but failing spectacularly. Inside, I could barely keep from laughing. This was like watching a bad sitcom unfold in real time. Their every move screamed, "We're in charge here," while their nervous glances betrayed the opposite. I went further, leaning on my acting skills. "I just don't understand all the rules, there are so many. Section 14B, Section 7, I think I might need legal counsel. Do you have a recommendation, or maybe an official form to fill out?" He shifted uncomfortably. We can provide guidance," he stammered. I nodded slowly, pretending to consider it. Yes, guidance, that would be helpful. My voice quivered slightly as I stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in, though I had no intention of letting him pass the gate. They left, muttering under their breath, their whole facade cracking. I watched them retreat across the street, their exaggerated professionalism collapsing into visible irritation. The funny part, it worked. They came back the next day even more determined. I continued the act, anxious, hesitant, overwhelmed by the weight of HOA authority. And each time they overplayed their intimidation, each misstep amplifying their own absurdity. Meanwhile, I began noticing other strange things. Flyers appeared on my doorstep, neighbors peeked curiously from behind curtains, and Karen was spotted scribbling frantically on a legal pad while packing her driveway. It was a neighborhood circus, and I had front row seats. I spent that night on my porch under the warm glow of the porch light thinking, I knew the longer I played along, the more desperate they would become, and desperation makes people careless. I could feel the tension rising, the stakes climbing higher with every visit. Then it hit me, the real turning point was coming. I wasn't just going to watch them crumble under their own absurdity. Soon, I'd have to reveal the one piece of information that would freeze them in their tracks forever. I smiled, sipping my coffee, staring at the little sign in the yard. It had started as a joke, but now it was the centerpiece of an escalating drama, a chessboard where I held all the hidden pieces. And somewhere across the street, Karen and her minions had no idea that the next confrontation would change everything. By the fifth day, the fake HOA cops had become a near-constant presence. Every time I stepped outside, I felt their eyes on me, lurking somewhere near the street, clipboards in hand, and yet they still had no idea who they were really dealing with. That was about to change. It started with another knock on my door in the early afternoon. I opened it cautiously, pretending to be anxious, gripping the doorframe like I was bracing myself for a confrontation I wasn't sure I could handle. "Sir, this is your final warning," the taller one said, badge tilted, clipboard clutched to his chest. "Remove the sign immediately or the HOA will escalate enforcement actions." I smiled faintly, forcing a shaky laugh. "Final warning, yes, I've heard that before. I just don't understand all the rules. There are so many sections and subsections, and I'm just a regular homeowner. Maybe I need guidance or someone to explain it to me." Their eyes narrowed. They didn't know what to make of my apparent vulnerability. That was the moment I decided it was time to end the charade and let them see who they were really dealing with. I straightened, my voice steady, confident, and calm. "You know, I've been very patient trying to work this out peacefully, but perhaps I haven't made it clear exactly who I am." They exchanged a glance, unsure. The taller one's pencil hovered over the clipboard as if he were frozen mid-note. "I am a federal agent," I said, deliberately slow, letting the words land like a punch. "I work with law enforcement at the national level. That means I know how authority works and I know when someone is pretending to have it, which brings me to you." Silence, absolute silence. The two of them froze mid-step like deer caught in headlights. Their confident posture collapsed into rigid shock. I could practically see their internal gears grinding, trying to process what they had just heard. The taller one stammered, we didn't know." "No, you didn't," I replied calmly, letting the weight of my voice fill the doorway. "And pretending to be officers, well, that's a federal offense. You understand that, don't you?" The shorter one's face turned pale. The mirrored sunglasses didn't hide the panic in his eyes. I let the silence stretch for a few more seconds, watching them crumble under their own overconfidence. It was almost painful if it weren't so satisfying. I leaned slightly closer to the doorway, lowering my voice like I was imparting some grave wisdom. "From now on, I suggest you reconsider how you enforce HOA rules. Because the next time you try to intimidate someone, it might not end with a warning. And trust me, you don't want it to." They nodded frantically, muttering apologies, trying to salvage whatever dignity they had left. Then they turned and walked away quickly, clipboard clattering to the ground as they left. I closed the door, heart racing, not from fear, but from adrenaline and the thrill of finally taking control. I went to my porch and sat down, staring at the sign. The quiet that followed felt almost surreal. For days, I had been walking a tightrope, pretending to be intimidated while letting them overreach. And now the tide had turned. The predators had realized far too late that they weren't in control. From that day forward, the fake HOA cops didn't return. I could still see Karen across the street, packing, muttering into her Bluetooth like a general who had just lost a war. The neighborhood gossip was in full swing, whispers about the guy who froze the HOA enforcers spread like wildfire. I even caught a few neighbors peeking from behind curtains, giving me discreet thumbs-up signs. I leaned back in my chair, coffee in hand, reflecting on what had just happened. It wasn't just about a sign anymore. It was about boundaries, respect, and knowing exactly when to reveal the cards you've been holding. Humor aside, it had been tense, exhausting, and absolutely exhilarating. And yet, as calm as the street looked now, I knew this wasn't the end. Karen would probably try to rally the board, the HOA might attempt some petty retaliation, and someone somewhere was undoubtedly planning their next move. But now they would think twice. They knew that the next time they tried to intimidate me, they were stepping into territory they couldn't possibly handle. I took a long sip of coffee, smiling to myself. The sign remained in the yard untouched, a small but powerful symbol of standing your ground. And somewhere across the street, Karen and her HOA minions were learning a lesson they would never forget. Some homeowners aren't ordinary. Some homeowners have authority that even fake cops can't touch. And for the first time in days, I felt a real sense of peace. After the big reveal, you'd think things would calm down. You'd be wrong. The street was far from peaceful. The fake HOA cops may have disappeared, but Karen, the self-appointed queen of our community, was still very much on the warpath. And with her, the rest of the HOA board seemed determined to reclaim some shred of authority, if only to save face. By the next morning, I started noticing subtle changes everywhere. Flyers in neighbors' mailboxes, gossip floating over hedges, and hushed whispers whenever I walked past someone on the sidewalk. "Did you hear about the guy with the sign?" they'd murmur. "He froze the HOA enforcers." I couldn't help but chuckle every time I heard it. There's something oddly satisfying about watching a group of people who thrive on control suddenly realize they're powerless. But humor aside, I also knew this was a dangerous phase. Desperation can make people reckless, and Karen had a long history of overreactions. It didn't take long for me to witness her next move. One afternoon, I spotted her packing outside her house, furious, scribbling notes in her signature pink legal pad. She was muttering so loudly into her Bluetooth that I could hear bits and pieces. "He can't just Section 14B, fines, authority, I need them back." I raised an eyebrow. Them, I knew exactly what she meant, the fake HOA cops. Apparently she was trying to rally reinforcements for round 2. Then the neighborhood chaos began to truly unfold. I started noticing more strangers lingering near my property, people pretending to jog but stopping suspiciously near the fence, a delivery person lingering longer than necessary. Even my neighbors seemed jittery, glancing over their shoulders when they thought I wasn't looking. Humor bubbled up despite the tension. Here I was, sitting on my porch sipping coffee while the HOA seemed to be running its own low-budget spy operation. I imagined them in a secret room, plotting strategies on a whiteboard. Phase 1, intimidate homeowner. Phase 2, escalate fines. Phase 3, and the third phase I realized was probably chaos. Late one evening, I noticed someone crouched behind a tree in my yard, carefully peeking around. I froze, then smiled. This was almost too easy. I decided to send a little message without saying a word. I turned on the porch light, making sure my silhouette was clearly visible, and stepped out, casually sipping my coffee. The figure froze, thinking they'd been spotted. I gave a small wave and a smile, and they bolted. That's when it hit me. Karen had probably sent a new team of enforcers, and they had no idea who I really was. The next few days became a mix of bizarre neighborhood theater and high-stakes tension. Flyers warning of fines appeared, and anonymous notes slipped under my door. "This is your final chance." Every single one made me smile. I knew they didn't realize how toothless their threats were against someone with actual authority. Meanwhile, Karen's obsession escalated. She started showing up at odd hours, observing, packing, sometimes muttering to herself. Her pink tracksuit had become a kind of uniform of war. Every time she drove past in her golf cart, clipboard in hand, I felt like I was staring in some twisted version of a reality show, one that I controlled from behind the scenes. Humor aside, there was an underlying tension that never fully dissipated. I knew the HOA was desperate for a win, and desperation makes people reckless. The calm before the storm had ended, replaced with constant, low-level chaos. Each time I stepped outside, I half expected someone to confront me, someone to try to assert authority again. And that's when I realized something important. Patience had been my greatest weapon. By letting them overreach, by allowing them to believe they had a chance to intimidate me, I had effectively made them prisoners of their own ego. The HOA's paranoia was self-perpetuating, and I could sit back, watch, and let it implode. As I sipped the last of my coffee, looking at the sign that had started all this, I felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. Relief that the fake cops were gone. Anticipation for the inevitable moves Karen would make next. She was resourceful in her own stubborn, misguided way, and I knew she wasn't done yet. But one thing was certain. Any further attempts at intimidation would be met with a homeowner who knew exactly how far this could go and who wasn't afraid to push back. And somewhere across the street, Karen was plotting, and I was ready. Just when I thought the worst of the intimidation was over, Karen and her HOA board decided to escalate. I suppose they figured if their fake cops couldn't intimidate me, maybe a full-blown public display of authority would. And that's exactly what they tried. It started with the neighborhood newsletter. I received a copy tucked under my door, glossy and official-looking, complete with bold letters and important notices. Every other page was standard HOA fluff, pool schedules, upcoming meetings, but then I got to the part about me. Homeowner in violation of community rules regarding signage. Immediate compliance required or legal action will be taken. I laughed quietly, shaking my head. They clearly hadn't learned from the last encounter. They were treating this like a chess game, but I was already 5 moves ahead. Then came the next escalation. Karen showed up in person at my gate, flanked by 2 more HOA board members I didn't even recognize. She carried her clipboard like a shield, her pen poised like a sword. "We're here to ensure compliance," she announced, in a tone that was supposed to sound authoritative but sounded more like someone trying way too hard. I stepped onto the porch, coffee cup in hand, pretending to wipe sleep from my eyes. "Good morning," I said casually. "You know, I was just about to review the newsletter. Section 14B, right? Very thorough. I do appreciate the effort." Her face tightened. "This is serious," she snapped. "Your sign is a direct violation of HOA regulations. Remove it immediately." I leaned against the doorframe, giving a small, contemplative nod. "I see, and what happens if I don't remove it?" My tone was calm, deliberate, almost teasing. Karen faltered, her carefully rehearsed lines failing her. You could face fines, legal action, and enforcement measures." I smiled faintly, letting her words hang in the air. "Enforcement measures, interesting. You know, I think we should clarify something. Enforcement measures are usually carried out by people with actual authority, not someone who's imaginative." Her jaw dropped slightly. That's when I decided it was time to hint again at the little secret I hadn't fully revealed to the neighborhood yet. "I've been very patient with all of this," I said slowly, "but I do have resources that make certain types of intimidation less effective." I let the words sink in, eyes fixed on hers, voice calm and controlled. Karen's posture wavered. The 2 board members beside her exchanged nervous glances. I could almost hear their thoughts. What does he mean? How far does he go? Then came the next move. They started taking photos of the sign, documenting the violation like it was a crime scene. One of the board members even tried to measure the distance from the sidewalk to my yard again. I sighed, stepping closer to the sign. "You do realize none of this will actually change anything, right?" I said softly, as if giving them a chance to save face. They didn't respond. I could see the tension rising in their shoulders, the panic flickering in their eyes. They were desperate for a win, and yet every move they made only made them look more ridiculous. By now, several neighbors had gathered on their lawns, pretending not to watch but clearly curious. I could feel the entire street holding its breath, and I knew, from the way Karen's hands trembled around the clipboard, that this confrontation would be remembered for a long time. Finally, Karen stepped back, trying to regain authority. "This isn't over," she said a little too loudly. "You will comply." I raised an eyebrow. "We'll see," I said simply, letting the words hang in the air like a warning. Inside, I was calm, collected, and in control. She had escalated everything, yet she had no idea that any further moves could backfire spectacularly. As I watched them retreat down the street, muttering to themselves and glancing nervously at the sign, I realized something. The HOA's desperation was their weakness. Every new threat, every attempt to assert authority only made them look more foolish and more powerless. I walked back to the porch, the warm glow of the evening sun reflecting off my coffee cup. The sign still stood, proud and untouched, a symbol not just of defiance, but of the slow, inevitable collapse of their overblown authority. Somewhere across the street, Karen was fuming, the board members worried, and the neighborhood buzzing with gossip. And I was just getting started. Because when people underestimate you, that's when the fun really begins. By the 8th day, the neighborhood had fully transformed into a stage for chaos and whispers. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, had gone from confident to frantic, and every member of her board seemed to teeter on the edge of panic. Flyers, notes, and half-hearted warnings had become background noise. My little no soliciting, no drama, no HOA tyranny sign had become a symbol, a tiny, sarcastic monument to common sense and patience. That evening, I was on my porch, sipping coffee and watching the sunset when I noticed a shadow lurking near the end of my driveway. A figure crouched low, trying to observe without being seen. I smiled inwardly. Clearly, Karen had sent a new team, desperate to monitor me. I didn't panic. Instead, I calmly stood and walked toward the figure, coffee in hand. Good evening, I said, voice casual, almost cheerful. Looking for something. The figure froze, eyes wide. Karen's voice cut from across the street, shrill and frustrated. Observe, report, don't provoke. But the message was clearly lost. The observer hesitated, then started retreating quickly once I took another step closer. I returned to my porch and settled into the chair, thinking back over the week. From a simple sign to phone calls, threats, and lurking observers, it had escalated far beyond anything I could have imagined. And yet, through it all, I had stayed calm, strategic, and most importantly, patient. The next morning brought the final blow to the HOA's overblown sense of authority. I received an email from the HOA board titled, Resolution of Sign Dispute. My heart skipped a beat as I clicked it, half expecting some petty fine or another absurd ultimatum. Instead, the message read, after reviewing the situation and consulting with legal counsel, it has been determined that the signage is within your rights as a homeowner. No further action will be taken. We apologize for any inconvenience caused. I leaned back in my chair and laughed quietly. Karen had been forced to admit on paper that she was powerless. The fake cops, the threats, the notes, they were all irrelevant in the face of reality. The neighborhood had witnessed the unraveling, and gossip spread like wildfire. The same people who had tried to intimidate me were now being quietly humiliated in front of everyone. Later that day, I saw Karen across the street, packing her driveway, muttering into her Bluetooth. She looked flustered, defeated, and slightly ridiculous in her pink tracksuit, clipboard abandoned at her side. I couldn't resist a small, subtle wave. She didn't wave back. I didn't expect her to. Pride doesn't allow for that. Neighbors came by over the next few days, some curious, some impressed, some just relieved that the saga was over. I explained the situation vaguely, careful not to reveal too much, letting the story spread naturally. The street had learned a lesson. A homeowner who understands authority and knows when to assert it is a force not to be trifled with. The sign remained in the yard, gleaming in the sun, untouched and unchallenged. It had started as a simple joke, but by the end it had become a symbol of resilience, strategy, and a little well-timed humor. Every time I looked at it, I remembered the tension, the absurdity, and the eventual triumph. I reflected on the experience, realizing that the key wasn't confrontation but patience. Letting the HOA overreach, exposing their absurdity, and maintaining calm allowed me to reclaim the narrative. Humor, observation, and strategic patience had turned intimidation into theater, and the theater had a happy ending. And somewhere across the street, Karen's frustration simmered, her attempts at authority permanently deflated. She had learned a lesson she would never forget. You can threaten, harass, and plot, but you cannot intimidate someone who knows the rules, knows the law, and knows how far to push back. I took one last sip of coffee, smiling at the sign that had started it all. The sun was setting, the street was quiet, and the chaos had faded. I knew the neighborhood would whisper about this for months, maybe years. But I also knew that some stories, especially the ones where logic and patience win over ego and aggression, deserve to be remembered. And so, as I sat back, coffee in hand, watching the evening sky, I realized something. Sometimes the smallest acts, like putting up a little sign, can spark the biggest victories. The HOA had been defeated, the fake cops had fled, and the neighborhood had learned who really held the power. And all it took was patience, observation, and just a little bit of humor. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.